everyone. Hello, everyone, and a warm welcome to the NIIM webinar on mental health, which here we are in Mental Health Week. And as you would have known, yesterday was World Mental Health Day, the 10th of October. My name's Amanda Quealy, and I'm the CEO of NIIM. And thank you for joining us this evening. We've got a number of very experienced mental health professionals with us tonight to be able to talk on the topic of mental health. And of course, it is something that is top of mind for all of us. In this global pandemic, we have all suffered in one way or another, I think, with isolation, with lockdowns, with our inability to connect with our family and friends. And that takes a toll on our psychological health, on our social health, and on our physical health as well. So we are living under what I see as constant stress. And added to that, the stresses of daily life that we all deal with has been a great burden across the community. So NIIM is actually building its capacity in terms of mental health support with a new mental health service. We have very much an integrative approach. We're bringing on naturopaths. We've already got experienced psychologists as part of our team, and you'll be meeting two of those tonight, as well as integrative doctors that very much have a lot of expertise in the mental health space. And added to that, we have developed, in response to demand, we've developed short consultations with our naturopaths. We're getting a lot of inquiries from individuals who are wanting to know how they can boost their immunity. What can they do to improve their health, mental health, physical health? So we're doing short consultations that you can book online for naturopaths for 15 minutes to get some really good advice on how to keep yourself well at this time. And in particular, if you are having the vaccine, then to look at what can you do in terms of adjunct therapies along with the vaccines that the government is rolling out. So thank you again for joining us. If you haven't already, please go to our website and sign up to be a Friends of NIIM. We would love to keep connected with you. Means that you get advance warning around these webinars, but also our regular updates and information that goes out. So our first speaker tonight is Dr. Sandra Parsons. Dr. Parsons is an integrative GP here at NIIM and has many years experience. Her particular areas of expertise, as you can imagine, are mental health, mind-body medicine, nutritional advice, preventative health, environmental medicine, looking after people with autoimmune disease, chronic fatigue syndrome, thyroid, a hormonal imbalance, and heart health. So a very broad spectrum of care. Sandra is, as you can imagine, a very busy GP here at NIIM, and we welcome her tonight to talk about anxiety, a review of the physical effects and some treatment options that are available in terms of an integrative approach. Thank you, Sandra.
Good evening. Thank you for joining us, and I'll start straight in. So anxiety, physical symptoms and suggested treatments. So anxiety is a set of physical symptoms triggered when we perceive a threat to our safety, real or imagined. It can be a near car accident, work-related problems, family upheaval, or even deadlines to meet. The stress response starts in the brain. Our senses, eyes and ears or both, send information to the amygdala, an area involved in emotional processing. The amygdala then sends a distress signal to the hypothalamus, the command center of the brain, which can communicate with the rest of the body through the unconscious autonomic nervous system. The distress signal is then turned into a cascade of hormones that flood our body. Initially adrenaline, but then if the threat doesn't go away, glucose and cortisol are released as well. This is called our fight or flight system. These hormones increase our blood pressure, pulse rate and respiratory rate to get more oxygen to our tissues, so we can respond to the perceived threat or danger. The whole response can take place before we become consciously aware, such as when we jump out of the way of a speeding car. The HPA axis response is designed to protect us from danger and is unconscious. The system is only designed to operate for a short time, and once the danger has passed, that is a signal for a return to our rest and digest and heal and repair system, our parasympathetic system, which should be our default system. Anxiety sets in when the sympathetic system is continually triggered by a constant feeling of threat, danger, or worry that never goes away. The continued abnormal production of cortisol and other stress hormones has a marked effect on our health, physically and emotionally. This is often termed dysregulated cortisol. I will list a few flow-on effects of this abnormal cortisol. Firstly, abnormal levels of fluctuating cortisol can deplete our immune system. We can have an overactive immune system, seeing everything as the enemy, or an exhausted immune system that can't raise a response. And this can lead to any number of symptoms, as all parts of our body can be affected. Firstly, there can be an increase in any infection, from chronic sinus to gut infections, upper respiratory infections, etc. It can increase the risk of autoimmune disease and cause an increase in some cancers. Major digestive problems, IBS, etc., can also be a result of this dysregulated cortisol, as the body no longer returns to its default setting of rest and digest, heal and repair when we are anxious. Even major food sensitivities, I've found, can often be due to high circulating cortisol when anxiety is at a peak in an oversensitive, highly reactive immune system in a person who never feels safe. This dysregulated cortisol has a major effect on our hormones as well. It directly affects our progesterone and can create a problem called estrogen dominance. So anxiety can adversely affect, or may even be a causative factor in endometriosis, PMS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, and menopausal symptoms, etc. Then next, dysregulated cortisol directly depletes our DHEA, our youth hormone, causing further imbalance in our hormones. Higher than normal levels of cortisol at night will affect our production of melatonin and affect our deep delta sleep. If we don't have enough deep delta sleep, our glymphatic system may not work effectively and our brains won't be able to normally detox. This can make it harder to lose weight, balance hormones, and reduce inflammation. And it also affects our cognitive function in the day, causing foggy brain, difficulty concentrating, loss of short-term memory, and other symptoms that are so concerning. The higher than normal circulating cortisol also causes abnormal glucose and insulin levels, directly and indirectly, causing insulin resistance and the possible risk of syndrome X. This can lead to weight gain around the belly that a lot of people are calling COVID kilos. And this is the sort of weight that exercise and dieting have little effect on. The only way to reduce this weight is to look at our sleep issues, to learn to sleep more deeply, and to reduce anxiety using some of the methods that are outlined below. When we are less anxious, we won't also be so attracted to comfort foods, and we will have more flexibility in choosing ways to relax. With continued stress, the frontal brain can be closed down, and we can make irrational, emotionally based decisions and are more prone to self-sabotage. And this means we can overeat foods we know that aren't healthy, have more alcohol, that sort of problem can arise. Our leptin and ghrelin levels are also affected, and comfort eating to reduce our anxiety levels leaves an impact on our weight and can increase inflammation throughout the body and brain. Weight is often, extra weight can be very much a marked inflammatory tissue. Inflammation is a causative factor behind most chronic illness, and anxiety can affect pain thresholds and reduce the body's ability to heal. Dr. Kelly Brogan, a psychiatrist in USA, New York, has written a book called A Mind of Your Own, detailing how anxiety and depression are due to inflammation in the brain and not to low serotonin, as we used to think. Remembering 85% of our serotonin is produced in the lining of the gut. So no wonder gut symptoms are a major cause. Well, when we're anxious, one of the first things to be affected can be our gut. This inflammation Kelly Brogan and others suggest can come from three major causes: unresolved emotional issues, because ruminating negative overthinking can also directly affect us physically at the cellular level, from the more 85,000 different toxins or more in our environment and increasing all the time. For example, say mold in a home will affect everyone differently because of epigenetics. One person may be perfectly well, one may have autoimmune disease, another depression, and a fourth may even have cancer. Everything we eat and drink is the third potential cause of inflammation, and particularly the high sugar foods, the ones we're most at risk of. The good news is that there is so much we can do to reduce our anxiety. The first is simply using the benefits of deep diaphragmatic breathing. The benefits are due to the stimulation of our vagus nerve, the only cranial nerve that connects to most of the organs in our chest and abdomen. It has efferent and afferent fibers, so deep breathing, by calming our heart rate, relaxes our muscles, and via the vagus can calm our brain. A good ratio can be 4 to 6 seconds in breath to 6 to 8 seconds out breath. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, a psychiatrist also in USA, who has written a book called The Body Keeps the Score, suggests any form of movement is a wonderful way to manage anxiety. For people with physical disability, there are exercises such as chair yoga available easily on YouTube, but otherwise any form of movement will help, particularly yoga, tai chi, martial arts, qigong, walking in nature, just hanging out in nature, walking barefoot every day, grounding, dancing to music, swimming. Any form of movement that feels good can be very beneficial. And one of the best antidepressants in the world is actually exercise. He also suggests having a daily routine is another helpful tool. Meditation always helps, but it doesn't have to be complicated. Knitting, painting, and playing a musical instrument can also be a form of meditation if we are focused. And the main thing is that we need to stop that ruminating, negative overthinking that can become such a habit. I've also found Dr. Brian Weiss, another psychiatrist, has wonderfully relaxing meditation tapes, easily accessed online. Louise Hay, Tara Brack, Dr. Joe Dispenza, and many others have wonderful relaxing visualizations, often free on YouTube, which can also be a great resource. Mindfulness, also another wonderful tool. Monash University currently has an online free mindfulness course that a lot of patients have found very helpful. Obviously, referral to a psychologist is so important at this time for the more specialized treatments, and luckily we have two very experienced psychologists speaking tonight. I've found that emotional freedom technique, thought field therapy, EMDR, and trauma release exercises have enormous benefit. I would suggest the tapping solution with Nick and Jessica Ortner, a great site to look at for the research behind the benefits of thought field therapy and emotional freedom technique. All the armed services in America are taught tapping, as it's called, so there is an enormous amount of research showing its effectiveness. One study has shown a veteran with PTSD has had a 52% reduction in symptoms with just tapping alone. And MRI research has shown that the benefits are sustainable. There are lots of free sites on YouTube, and it is very easy to learn online. There are free sites also looking at tapping for anxiety, tapping for sleep, tapping for pain relief, and tapping for weight loss and body image as well. Professor Peter Stapleton from Bond University is an Australian with vast experience in tapping and a lot of research and study available on her site as well. I have also found trauma release exercises developed by David Berselli, a psychologist, another great resource. His research showed that we can hold trauma in our psoas muscle, and he has developed specific exercises to release trauma from the body. There are workshops run in Melbourne by Richmond Heath, a physiotherapist, based on his work. Eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, called EMDR, has also been very successful in treating anxiety in my experience. And there are many experienced psychologists in Melbourne who are trained in this area. It is highly recommended by Dr. Bessel van der Kolk. The Richards Trauma Process, TRTP, a way to use gentle hypnotherapy to reprogram the deep subconscious, has been another highly effective method to reduce anxiety in those with a history of trauma. Further information can be found online. Moving on to more practical food-related issues, reducing inflammatory foods is a great help as well. The difficulty being that inflammatory foods are often the ones we eat when anxious to help us relax. The main foods to avoid are processed foods, fast foods, and those high in sugar. But I'm also mindful of not making people feel guilty if they do reach for those foods at times of stress, because our bodies are far more resourceful than we realize. And I think the most important thing is to have a lot of compassion for ourselves during difficult times. Remember, all grains are full of sugar, dairy, and sometimes red meats can also at times contain too much sugar, depending on how the animals were fed. Foods to eat are dark chocolate, potassium-rich foods such as bananas, pumpkin seeds, magnesium-rich foods such as leafy greens, prebiotic foods which feed the healthy bugs in our gut. We want more of these foods, such as asparagus, artichokes, leek onion and garlic, and also vitamin B-rich foods. Now, certain probiotics can also help. There's some research to show that a number of them, Bifidobacterium longum, Lactobacilli, Cassia shirota, excuse me, and a yeast Saccharomyces boulardii. Supplements to help deepen sleep and repair nutritional deficiencies are also needed. Oh no, excuse me. GABA, L-threonine, magnesium, and vitamin D are essential in Melbourne, where we need a supplement all the year round. N-acetylcysteine and vitamin C and melatonin itself. Oh, excuse me, sorry. Are just a few. Now, something as simple as staying dehydrated can also be really important. We often forget to drink enough fluids in the day, particularly in winter and when we're indoors, and coffee and tea and alcohol can be dehydrating. Epsom salt baths are really effective in reducing anxiety. You can also add magnesium chloride crystals as well as the magnesium sulfate crystals. Lavender oil and soothing music can lead to a very relaxed state. Infrared saunas and float tanks, as well as all allied health practitioners, are really helpful and should be part of our regular routine. Acupuncture, Ayurvedic medicine, kinesiology, Reiki, reflexology, therapeutic massage, networking chiropractic work can all be wonderful assets in reducing anxiety. Let's not forget that we can also do testing to check nutritional levels. We have tests for gut health and salivary tests to check cortisol, hormonal and melatonin levels to give more specific information, as well as the all-important vitamin D levels. Vitamin D is more a pro-hormone than just a vitamin, and normal levels have a great impact on reducing anxiety by reducing inflammation. Thank you for listening. And I hope there's some information that will help.
Thank you, Sandra, for such a comprehensive review of, I guess, the literature and also the various interventions that are available to us. So I hope that you were able to find some things in there that connected with you that you could perhaps follow up with. Certainly, there were a lot of easy, low-cost, practical solutions that I think we would all benefit from. We keep moving on, and I'd like to introduce Peter Webb. Peter is a practicing psychologist and integrative psychologist here at NIIM. He has many years' experience, and in particular is a leadership coach as well, having worked across the Asia Pacific for many years, trained as a naturopath, and he practices mind-body therapies, drawing on a range of successful therapeutic approaches and the psychology of wisdom to help individuals. So Peter has a very topical subject tonight, given that COVID has been such a major disruptor in our lives. And the title of his topic is Life Disruptors, How to Make Difficult Decisions. Thank you, Peter.
Thanks very much, Amanda, and welcome everybody to this presentation tonight. It must feel like we've gone through 4 seasons twice. We're into our 2nd year, and I wonder if the seasons aren't better represented by the 4 seasons of uncertainty, stress, complexity, and fatigue. And we've been through this process over and over again, and it becomes very, very debilitating. So I wanted to look tonight at the situation of how we make decisions. And so the question is, how do you make decisions? What kinds of decisions are there to be made? And how do you decide? It becomes increasingly difficult when we're faced with doubt, dilemma, and disruption. It's one thing to choose a laundry detergent, but it's quite another to choose whether you should get vaccinated or not, for example. So complexity is a monumental issue for us in lockdown at the moment. And the more complexity we have, the more emotional load there is, and the more difficult it is to make these really hard, difficult, and long-lasting decisions. So I want to talk about decision-making tonight, how we actually think when we're making decisions. And I hope by the end of my presentation tonight to have given you some ideas, some thoughts, and some practices around how to make better decisions, even when you're doubtful and you're stuck with a dilemma. There are no easy solutions in the way that we're all going through this pandemic at the moment. So we're taught, of course, to think rationally, to look at the facts. Rational thinking is the way we're taught to look at things, to analyze, to calculate. If you have to make a decision, you're told to get a sheet of paper, draw a line down the middle, have pros on one side, cons on the other. This is all about rational thinking and making a calculation. But it turns out that the brain devotes very little resources to rational thinking. In fact, to process the information in the prefrontal cortex, where most of our rational thinking takes place, the running speed of the prefrontal cortex is around about 7 ± 2 bits per second, which is not much greater than the old Commodore 64 computer that those of you who are old enough to remember was the very first computer that we had. It's not terribly efficient, and it gets overwhelmed very easily. And you may never have all the information to make a decision, to try to use your rational thinking to make a decision. And you can suffer paralysis by analysis, too much overthinking. And you get caught up in the prefrontal cortex of rational thinking, and it's not very helpful, actually. So we turn to our emotional thinking. And in fact, that's where most of us think first. We feel, and then we think. So you come to a conclusion based on your intuition, based on your sense on what feels right. It's the emotional part of the brain that has more resources devoted to it. So most of our brain is actually involved with the process of feeling in terms of coming to a decision. This makes sense when, from an evolutionary perspective, we actually developed the social brain in order to be able to live together. And we're very good actually at making social decisions around who's a friend, who's a foe. So we tend to rely on the emotional brain quite a lot. And it's easy to understand why, because the emotional brain processes information at a speed of around about 11 million bits per second. That's pretty fast. It's so fast that you come to a conclusion in your gut before you even have time to rationalize it to yourself. One of the problems, of course, with the emotional brain is it's very easily persuaded, and it looks for patterns that may not actually exist. It can also become fixated on beliefs or myths or storylines. So the emotional brain is very powerful, it's very fast, and that's where we go first, our gut instinct about something. But it's not terribly good at analyzing things or parsing truth from fiction. And it easily develops its own storyline, as we see in the various conspiracy theories that swarm around us, much as the virus swarms around. We have actually online viruses that are even more dangerous than the real one. So how are you supposed to think then? If the rational reason part of the brain can get overwhelmed so easily by data, and the emotional brain can so easily get locked into patterns, then how do you make a difficult decision? I mean, a really difficult decision. Do you go with your heart or do you go with your head? You need to be able to balance both, it turns out, somehow to make complex decisions. You've got to be able to see the rational brain and the information that you're processing. And at the same time, you've got to feel and think about what you're feeling in the situation and appreciate that both of these parts of the brain have something to contribute to making a complex decision. This isn't so easy, of course, and it does take a bit of training. But I want to help you to make a difficult decision, help you to actually think more clearly around how to judge in a situation that is perhaps a dilemma. Perhaps there's no right answer. Perhaps the decision you have to make is actually the least worst alternative, where you're trying to hurt the least number of people possible, but you know that you're going to have to break some eggs to make an omelette. Very difficult. So here's my suggestion for balanced thinking, how to actually use balanced thinking to make a decision. There are 6 components to this, and the first component is focus. We heard Dr. Sandra Parsons talk about the importance of mindfulness and meditation, and indeed getting good at focusing on that which is most important. Rather than getting fixated on one element of what's happening around you, try to focus on what's important to you. Pay attention to the broader perspective, but develop a good capacity to focus on that which is going to be most helpful and most resourceful to you. The second element is to discern, and this is probably what we refer to as common sense. What does your life experience suggest? What does the life experience or the lived experience of others suggest? For example, when we talk to our parents or grandparents who may have lived through world wars or famine or other sorts of problems, you realize that their lived experience can inform what we're experiencing now. And it just gives some context behind what we're going through, this deep valley that we're all traversing. Others before us have traversed this valley as well, and they have come out the other side of it. So discern what's happening around you. And the third element is to make lots of small decisions, not to wait until you have to make a big decision. Get used to making little decisions. This is actually part of experimenting, prototyping, seeing what works and what doesn't. It's far better to make lots of little decisions that may not work out so well, rather than wait for one big decision that may work or it may not. So prototyping or experimentation is an important element of balanced thinking. The fourth element, and you've heard Dr. Sandra Parsons talk about this, is compassion. Self-compassion, most important, being compassionate with yourself, but being compassionate with others, being compassionate with public transport officers, police, shop assistants, the people around us. We can express compassion. The more we express compassion to others, the better it serves us, the better it benefits us. It actually has a very strong self-reflective ability. Elements like gratitude and hope work in much the same way. Fifth is to regulate your own emotions. Doesn't mean suppress what you're feeling. Actually, it means to honor what you're feeling. To be able to admit that I'm feeling anxious, or to actually admit that I'm feeling stressed, to honor that and to regulate it, to actually find a way of achieving some balance, some equanimity in the way in which your emotions are arising for you. And then finally, being able to tolerate diversity in values that you see around you, recognizing that not everybody shares the same belief system or values that you do, being able to stand in somebody else's shoes and imagine how they must be feeling and what are the value systems that they're coming from. So recognizing that diversity and being able to tolerate that, being able to accept the differences in people around you. All of these components, these 6 components, are essential to balanced thinking, to be able to work with both the head and the heart and to arrive at a judgment or a decision which is going to be much better balanced than working with either one on its own. And to apply balanced thinking, I would suggest in closing that there may be some ways in which you can do that. You can ask yourself, am I focusing on the right things in making this decision? How might this be viewed from other people's experience? Would somebody looking at the way I'm making this decision have a view about that? Would they actually see it differently to the way I'm seeing it? Recognizing that how you move forward is important. Are you moving forward quickly enough, or are you stalling? Are you procrastinating? What is the speed or the pace with which you're making decisions? And how are you displaying compassion towards the people involved, your own family and others around you, as well as self-compassion? And finally, are you honoring your emotions without letting them overwhelm you? Because this becomes really important, being able to recognize your emotions. I'm going to pause there because I really wanted to be able to give you some key skills that you could apply and you could use. And hopefully we'll pick this up in the Q&A session at the end. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Peter. And as Peter said, yes, once we've heard from all of our speakers, then there will be an opportunity at the end to ask some questions. And we have had some questions already come in that I'd like to be able to pose to our speakers. So moving on, Dr. Eliza Sims has recently joined NIIM. Eliza is a clinical psychologist. She obviously has a strong interest in mental health in terms of promotion, prevention and treatment. She works with clients in a very tailored way, individually based approaches, using that psychological, social and lifestyle factors to develop the best of health and well-being, and using therapies such as cognitive behavioural therapy, acceptance and commitment therapy, mindfulness-based therapy, positive psychology with adolescents and adults. So tonight, Eliza's topic is developing resilience in a pandemic, something that we all would benefit from. Thank you, Eliza.
Thank you so much, Amanda, and good evening, everyone, and thank you for taking time to join us as we celebrate Mental Health Week. I'd like to present to you tonight on the topic of developing resilience in a pandemic. I recently started at NIIM and I'm excited to be part of an integrative and multidisciplinary service here in Melbourne. I'd like to acknowledge all those in the healthcare sector who are providing care for us at this time. Sorry, just trying to move through the slides. Well, what a ride it has been since March 2020. Corona coaster is a new word suggested by Collins Dictionary, and it's defined as the severe mood swings experienced during the coronavirus pandemic. This has certainly been a time of ups and downs and what some would describe as collective trauma in the face of serious threat and widespread change as we adapt to living with COVID-19. The potential for COVID-19 to impact mental health and wellbeing was recognised early in the pandemic by the World Health Organization in 2020. In addition to concerns around contracting the virus itself, some of the measures used to contain its spread have negatively impacted mental health. Here are 6 of the main stresses that we've faced during the pandemic. Firstly, there is ongoing threat and concern about contracting COVID. We receive information about daily cases that keeps us on alert and cautious. We undergo tests at the sign of any symptoms, and some with the virus have had serious life-threatening complications and even death. Next, there are widespread restrictions of movement, travel, curfews, access to services, and there is a lack of control over many aspects of our day-to-day lives. Then there's the impact of isolation. Many have experienced the effects of social and physical distancing measures, lockdowns and quarantine. It's been a time of rapid disruption. We've witnessed the ever-changing landscape of the pandemic, and constant change has become the new normal, challenging our ability to cope. We've adapted to mask wearing, online shopping, video conferencing and working and schooling from home. There's been significant loss associated with the pandemic. Sadly, families have lost loved ones to the virus and others have endured loss of employment, financial security and future plans. Many grieve losing our old way of life. And lastly, the impact of uncertainty. We face an unfamiliar situation, one that's unprecedented in our lifetime. There's a lack of information about what's ahead, and for some, the uncertainty about vaccination and treatment options. Together, these conditions have created much instability in our life. So when things are unstable and we feel threatened, the nervous system can be overloaded, and we heard a lot about that from Sandra. The threat response activates a range of physical, cognitive and emotional symptoms, and while this response is imperative for our survival, it can become problematic when it's prolonged, making it difficult to restore our nervous system to its baseline. The impact of COVID-19 on our mental health is significant. It's considered the most prolonged and serious stress in our lifetime and is affecting every level of the population. Stress, confusion and anger are commonplace as a result of the pandemic. And while people may not experience any long-term concerns, COVID-19 has the potential to contribute to or exacerbate pre-existing mental illness. There are increased rates of depression, anxiety, PTSD, self-harm behaviour and substance misuse. And this is placing a huge demand on the mental health services. So here's a range of emotional reactions that might surface in a pandemic, and you may recognise some of or all of them in response to different stages or events. So disbelief and denial, panic, and I love that one, I think that's a great image. Fear and worry, grief, hopelessness, overwhelm and burnout, frustration and anger, lockdown fatigue, and unhelpful coping, such as overuse of devices, misuse of substances, eating disturbances, gambling, self-harm and aggression. So the resilience model shown here describes 4 levels of wellbeing that people typically experience in stressful situations. When we succumb or give up, we've been overwhelmed by this stressful situation and our level of wellbeing is significantly weakened. We feel defeated and like things are out of our control, and this can generate a sense of helplessness and is often not within the person's control. It reflects a state where the stressor may exceed one's personal resources. When we put up with the stressful situation, we're better off than when we gave up, but we're still unhappy and our level of wellbeing is diminished, and we often suffer personally and professionally, and this could be described as a state of languishing. When we bounce up, we recover from the stressful situation and bounce back to being ourselves, which we call resilience. And when we step up, we do whatever it takes to meet the challenge and grow to an even higher level of functioning and wellbeing, and we call this thriving. So how do we adapt and develop resilience with the potential to thrive? Being resilient is similar to a tree whose branches remain flexible and bend with the wind rather than rigid and crack under pressure. It's the same for you and I. When we're resilient, we have the mental and physical strength necessary to remain flexible. We're able to bend and grow with change and stressful life situations. So in caring for your mental health, it's important to make your wellbeing a priority. It's helpful to build in daily habits for your mental health, just like brushing our teeth and showering. So begin by focusing on the basics: nutrition, sleep, exercise. And where I'd like to focus tonight is on building your repertoire of psychological strategies. Here are 10 tips for psychological resilience that I hope you find useful. The first tip is to build awareness. As we've seen, these challenging times can give rise to a host of uncomfortable feelings. Slow down, drop the anchor, and tune into your internal experience. Label the emotions you're feeling, for example, stress, anger, sadness, overwhelm. Notice the rise and fall of your feelings and thoughts. Learn to surf the waves as they come and go. Greater awareness will allow you to pause and empower you to respond in helpful ways than when you're functioning on autopilot. Strategies for building awareness include mindfulness meditation, journaling, self-monitoring, mind-body practices like yoga, tai chi, and I've included some of these resources at the end for these practices. Regular practice of relaxation strategies is preventative and restorative. Use self-regulation to tell your nervous system that you're safe from any immediate threat. Nourish your nervous system. You can get quick relief in just 10 minutes using strategies like breath work, meditation, soothing the senses with candles and aromatherapy, movement and exercise. Build in relaxation time, listening to music. You can have uplifting and soothing playlists, watching movies, reading, gardening, games and puzzles, craft work and art. Use screen time, social media and gaming in moderation. There are actions we can take to bring a sense of control to our lives. Explore what's most important to you. Define a good day and create a routine that includes all these aspects to bring some level of certainty. Set some goals for the day using a daily planner. Start small and recognise your achievements. On some days it might just be showering, eating well, walking, shopping, cooking, responding to emails. Work towards creating a home and a workplace that is as safe, secure and predictable as possible. Research suggests that much of our emotional response to a situation is determined by the way that we talk to ourselves. The ability of some people to bounce back from setback is not due to a triumph of will, as we once thought, or due to having some inborn greatness, but rather the way people explain events to themselves, which is known as their explanatory style. So the words we say to ourselves can impact our response to the pandemic. It can be helpful to reframe our perspective, and the good news is that how you interpret an event is something you can learn and practice. Begin by acknowledging the difficulties and the impact caused by the pandemic. Then try to balance your negative thoughts with positive ones. We are stressed. It's common to see things as worse than they really are. Ask yourself, am I getting ahead of myself, jumping to conclusions when I don't know the outcome? Am I catastrophizing how bad the consequences will be? Am I underestimating my ability to cope? Are there uplifting perspectives? It can also help to guard your mind and filter unhelpful external information. Keep up to date with factual information while limiting your media exposure. I'm going to bypass this slide because it does actually overlap with some of Peter's presentation. Acceptance. While there are things we can do to modify and buffer the stresses, it's important to recognise what you can and can't control. Rather than dwelling on things outside of your control, increase your sense of security by focusing on what you can do to improve your situation. Let go of the notion that you have to control this. What do you think it would be like to drop the struggle against the pandemic and pour your energy into pursuing the valued directions that matter most to you? Recognise and adapt to what is outside our control. I like the metaphor of being a river that forges ahead as it flows over rocks and obstacles. Gratitude. In difficult times, many are grateful for the small pleasures, the available freedoms and important moments. And we can learn to live in a way that recognises simple abundance and finding comfort and joy in everyday life. We have the chance to let go of a need for constant grasping and create contentment. Try writing a gratitude diary where you list 3 things you're grateful for each day. This is a wonderful tool for families to use over dinner or at bedtime. Cultivate self-compassion, and we've mentioned that a few times tonight. Be kind and gentle with yourself and modify your expectations. Allow yourself to grieve the old normal. In developing compassion for others, recognise that they're struggling too. Find patience and forgiveness in your everyday interactions. Offer help where you can at this challenging time. It's important to acknowledge there are differing levels of burden and suffering in the community, yet we all feel the pandemic's impact and no one is exempt. This shared experience offers a unique opportunity for mutual understanding, empathy, and strengthening our bonds. Research suggests that the power of social connection can protect against many of life's stresses. Connection can be with one's family, friends, local community, and even global community. Strategies might include regular rituals with immediate family, walks with friends, picnics at the park, and video conferencing. Social networks are our precious resource, so stay connected where you can. Reach out to those you think might be isolated and in need of support. That being said, living in close confines can also cause friction or escalate problematic, violent interactions for some families. If so, please seek assistance via the recommended health services at the end of this presentation. The big picture. Look around you in awe of nature. Remember the big picture. Rise early to watch the sunrise, walk under enormous trees, or if you're lucky, observe the power of the ocean's waves. We're part of a natural world that has endured serious challenges over thousands of years. There are many before us who've struggled in times of war, famine, and natural disaster. They've found their way through these times. As we emerge from a series of lengthy lockdowns, we can turn our minds towards recovery and focus our energy on finding a way forward. Perhaps in the aftermath, we will have gained wisdom in the struggle and will reflect on how we developed both individually and as a community. So here are some resources I've put together, and I hope you can use these on your path to resilience. I think you'll be able to access these later. There are mindfulness apps, a self-care journal, some tip sheets, and an online course for mental health in place of, say, individual therapy if you're struggling to get in to see someone. Here is also some support services you can contact in order to receive further help. Your general practitioner, psychologist, mental health services, and support lines. Thank you.
Thank you, Eliza. And just to say that Eliza is our mental health lead here at NIIM to help us develop and grow our mental health capability that we can provide to you. So we have had a number of questions that came in earlier, and so we've put a bit of a compilation of those together to be able to put to our speakers. The first one is for you, Sandra. What nutrition and supplements would you recommend for stress and anxiety and to relieve mental fatigue?
Oh, thanks, Amanda. For some reason, I can't turn on my camera, I'm sorry to say, but hopefully you can hear me.
We can hear you.
Oh, good. Look, a very good question. I think obviously there's differences. Everyone needs to love what they eat and eat what they love. But I've found that the least inflammatory diet is often more plant-based. The more inflammatory foods are the high sugar foods such as grain, and even dairy these days can be quite a high, have quite high sugar levels. The animals are sort of often not able to eat grass, they're fed grain. So I'm suggesting that often people get their calcium from more nuts and seeds, greens, basically fish with bones, your sardines and anchovies, and basically bone broth. So there's other sources of calcium. So it's just minimizing dairy, minimizing grains. Healthy animal protein is important. But plants contain a lot of carbs we can get for our sedentary lifestyles. They seem less inflammatory for most people. I know not everybody feels a plant-based diet is good, but on the whole, I've found it's the least inflammatory one. I think also that there are certain supplements. It's good to have some testing done, maybe with your local GP, test your levels of zinc, your vitamin D, most important. I think vitamin C is essential on a daily basis. We're one of 4 mammals that can't make our own, and we burn through a lot when we're stressed and anxious. I think magnesium is extremely important, very low in the soils in Australia, often difficult to test for. So I think a regular magnesium supplement, often a multivitamin. Our soils are rather deficient, and even with a healthy diet, there may be nutritional deficiencies. And now the other part of the question was the supplements. Yes, now supplements, I think we also need things like amino acids can be very calming. L-threonine, the calming part of green tea, 5-HTP. These are amino acids that aren't drugs that can help us deepen our sleep, and they're very safe to take even for children. GABA is important, and of course adrenal adaptogens. An adaptogen means this is a herb that if it doesn't help won't cause any harm. And basically I feel rhodolia, withania, the ginsengs, even saffron. And if you're not on an antidepressant, St. John's wort. And then there are herbal teas, chamomile tea, even St. John's wort tea. There are so many sort of naturally based ways to reduce our anxiety physically. So hopefully that will be a few suggestions.
Thank you, Sandra. This has been the 6th lockdown in Melbourne and has really tested our resilience. And it is hard to keep supporting each other. I mean, Peter, have you got some thoughts on how do we achieve this?
Thanks, Amanda. I thought Eliza gave a wonderful summary of resilience and how to establish resilience. So there are a lot of answers to this question right there. And when you get the slides, go to those resources that Eliza presented to us. I would actually point out that that we suffer from a thing called cognitive load. Cognitive load is the fact that one thing comes on top of another, on top of another, and on top of another. And the key is to try to reduce that cognitive load, to recognize each stressor as separate and to try to minimize that stressor. It actually reduces the total load. So that's an additional thing on top of what Eliza has shared with us tonight.
And I think after we've had stressful day, I mean, I really feel for people who are working from home. They've had a long period of working from home, but also having to homeschool, still be carers for parents, for children. There's a lot that individuals are juggling. What do you think we could do, Eliza, in that sort of 10 minutes, 15 minutes at the end of the day to de-stress? I think you are on mute. We just can't hear you.
Here we go. Thank you. That is a good question. And I think it would be good to set up a regular time and find a time either at the beginning of the day, as soon as you wake, before others are up, or even in the evening before bed. If you do only have a short amount of time, find a quiet place where you're unlikely to be interrupted and close your eyes and just focus on your breathing. You can use a technique called box breathing. And I've actually put a link to Beyond Blue, have a really nice little video of box breathing that you can practice. And it's a very effective technique. You learn a cycle of breathing in the shape of a box or a square. And there are 4 steps in that breathing technique. And you breathe in for 4 seconds, hold for 2, breathe out for 6, and hold for another 2. And you repeat that for 10 rounds, just very calmly. And my clients have noticed that they significantly reduce their heart rate in just a few minutes using that technique. So, and if you do have a little bit of extra time, soothe the senses and bring in perhaps a candle or some aromatherapy, those kinds of things, some gentle music, and that will really put you in a state of relaxation within 10 to 15 minutes.
Thank you. Welcome back, Sandra.
Thank you.
You mentioned around weight gain is common, through people suffering anxiety and depression. Have you got some suggestions, some quick tips around overcoming that, how we can tackle weight gain? I mean, you have talked about diet and a plant-based diet.
Yeah, no, thanks, Amanda. I think it is very much something we've noticed. Patients are commonly coming in with the COVID kilos. And I think to remember that the amygdala, that ancient part of our brain, has been there for many thousands of years. And once triggered, the only response it knows is the famine is coming to put on weight. So very much this is the sort of weight that's trying to protect us, I would say. So we will be driven to, we'll have more feeling for carbs. And it's going to be really hard because the more carbs we eat, the more inflammation. So in the long-term process of eating more inflammatory, high sugary foods, which feel good in the immediate time, it actually aggravates our long-term symptoms. So if we can be mindful of that, and again, having compassion for ourselves, make better choices. But I think as we've talked tonight, meditation and mindfulness, sleeping more deeply. If you're not getting your deep delta sleep, it's almost impossible to lose weight. So I think we need to be aware of important things like our sleep needs our first attention. it's not about dieting or exercising, getting a bit obsessive about it and getting angry when we don't see results. This is all counterproductive. So we want to love what we eat and eat what we love, but as we feel more calmer and more relaxed, we'll make better choices. And eventually that weight will balance when we're feeling more relaxed. So treating anxiety is the best way to help manage this extra kilos we're putting on.
Thank you. I feel much better already. So, Peter, there are in some households some debate around, to be vaccinated, not to be vaccinated. Government has mandated it for health workers, and we are certainly in that space here at NIIM. And obviously there are other things you can do as well as vaccination to protect yourself. But what impact is this having on relationships, and how can we preserve those relationships where there may be differing views?
Most definitely. We're dividing between the vaccinated and the unvaccinated. It's very disturbing to see society being riven in the way that it is in our country and in other countries at the moment. The purpose of my talk was to present the idea of balanced thinking. We can go with this the notion of should I be vaccinated or shouldn't I, based on the emotional argument. We do our own research, which means we follow our own confirmation bias about what feels right, or we try to follow the advice and go by what the epidemiologists tell us, or go by what the modelling tells us. But actually both of those approaches are unsuited completely to be able to make a complex decision like that. And you really have to find a way of striking a balance. And the same is true of our friends and relatives who might be very firmly on one side or the other. You have to regulate your emotional response in that situation and not to become carried away, because I think, as Sandra's pointed out, emotions can be inflammatory. Anger and fear can actually trigger inflammation. So you must find a way of regulating your own emotions in that situation. So again, just go to the suggestions I've made in how to practice balanced thinking.
Yes, thank you. That is, I guess that provokes anxiety in itself, thinking that we can be so divided in the community about what you can and can't do, whether you're vaccinated or not. That in itself is quite anxiety provoking, isn't it? Just wondering, Eliza, around, there are many parents who have been homeschooling children. Children themselves can be anxious. I know that you do also see adolescents in your practice, and I imagine this year for those students who in particular have been doing year 12, etc., it must be a nightmare for them. So have you got some thoughts about parents looking after themselves and their families?
Yes. Look, I do think it is about trying to make the home as safe and predictable and calm as possible. And it's very challenging at the moment to create that, but I think it does need to be a priority and a place where your nervous system can recover from all the strains going on out there. I think it's important to also recognise the response to COVID in yourself and in your child, and again, extend that compassion and perhaps validate their feelings or their concerns or their strong emotions. And then you can perhaps look for positive shifts that are happening and talk to them about that. For example, that the restrictions are easing soon and that there is sort of a light at the end of the tunnel and looking ahead in a positive way. You could also incorporate some relaxation training like I described and, do that together. It might even be turn on a yoga video and do that together, or put a relaxation tape on and do that as a family, or at least, two of you, or even give it to your child to do on their own. But there are definitely things you can do, and take the external pressures off where you can, I think, to, where possible, set some limits and boundaries around all the things that are impinging upon the family.
Thank you. Look, we've reached our 7 o'clock. The time has gone really quickly. I just really want to thank our 3 speakers tonight. Thank you for taking the time to put together the presentations and to making yourself available. We will put those presentations up on our website so that there'll be this video will be available to anyone who wants to visit the NIIM website as of next week. And just to remind everyone that we are a charitable organisation, and so the provision of education and health promotion activities is supported by donations, which is a tax deduction. So we invite you to make a deduction if you can. So just once again, thank you to everyone. Look after yourselves during Mental Health Week. It's something that we can be much more aware of. I think we've got a huge amount of information and resources from our speakers tonight. So follow us on social media, Instagram and Facebook, and check out this webinar at our website. So thank you.